You've been here a lot of years. We've been doing the show since 2008. I sort of feel like you've been here almost every year. It's great to see you coming back.
Well, 2008 we had this thing called Android we were launching, so we thought people might want to hear it.
I've heard of that. Yeah. I actually went back and I found the video of your keynote from 2008. It was really struck me as something kind of funny that both you and Chris Albrecht walked out with paper for your notes. Like you had like an actual like ream of paper to give your keynote speech on, and then here we are, and these years later, like that's kind of no one does that anymore. It's kind of amazing how much things have changed.
37 teleprompter apps in Google Play, I'm sure.
So you started off that discussion in 2008 talking a little bit more about, you've been kind of a serial entrepreneur to that point. Android had just been acquired by Google. A few years earlier, had been acquired and launched in 2008. And you described yourself at that point as a serial entrepreneur, and now you're kind of on the other side of the business. So I was wondering what you've learned in making that transition to, from being the entrepreneur to being the guy who picks the entrepreneurs.
Sure. I mean, it's to some extent it's somewhat similar, right? With a lot of the portfolio companies, you're getting involved almost as a part of the founding team. Not that you're that hands-on, but it's the same way that you decide what you're going to work on as an entrepreneur, who you're going to team with, what you want to build. You use some of the same DNA, or I use some of that same DNA when I'm trying to think about and evaluate the investments that I'm making, and I, sort of trying to put myself in the shoes of the founder. So, I think having done it before gives me a little bit of muscle memory in terms of the type of companies I'm looking at and that I look to invest in. I think that's true of a lot of my fellow partners on the Google Ventures team, who also, most of whom have been founders of other companies. And then I think it also helps quite a bit as we look at how we can help that portfolio of companies to be able to bring what we saw and experienced as founders and the scars that we had, and perhaps helping our portfolio to avoid getting those same scars.
Do you hear pitches and you're like, sorry buddy, I tried that in 2006, that's just not going to work?
Yeah, you have to be careful, for a couple of reasons in doing that. First of all, a lot of startups is timing, right? So, I started a voice-based personal secretary product in 1990. And, we did have an exit to Orange, a mobile phone company, but then there was literally close to a decade of not much happening in voice-based secretaries, and then there's Android with voice enablement and Siri. So you do see timing sometimes as being a factor.
It's kind of funny because we talking about timing and talking about the title of the session being a tipping point, and we've seen such incredible revolution in computing over the last 5 years, but it sort of feels like in 2013 that we're maybe at a bit of a plateau, or maybe at an area where a lot of the big games have been already made, and now we're trying to figure out what is coming next. So, do you agree with that? Do you feel that we've reached kind of this stasis almost?
Not at all. Certainly not in mobile. I mean, there's if you've ever hiked, you've definitely witnessed the concept of false plateaus. And I'd say, if anything, we've gone through a fairly early stage of innovation, and to some extent a little bit of noisy innovation. And I think the fact that the devices have matured so much, that the developer ecosystems are maturing so much, the tools are developing, and the platforms have evolved. I think it's really, people can be a lot more thoughtful about how you build big businesses around mobile, which there's been a lot of innovation, and there have been some big businesses, but I think there is a tremendous amount of innovation yet to happen.
Well, what kinds of bets would you make, or are you making then around those areas? I mean, if you were going to start a company, forget funding, if you were going to start a company today, what would you do?
Sure. Good question. And but I think if I was to look at the different areas and trends that I think are interesting, where I would certainly be exploring to start a company, I think there's been still, very little value built in an area where there can be tremendous value built in the space of enterprise, especially with what's been happening with RIM and the vacuum that's been created there. So we've made some bets with companies like Enterprise, which do a great job at taking your mobile device and giving you an ability so that one device can have a profile for work and for home. You can easily switch between the two with their product divide for iOS and Android. So there's great platforms to make these better for enterprise, but then there's a huge amount of vertical opportunity. If you look at most people who have tablets and mobile devices in the enterprise. These things have more compute power than your desktop PCs had a year or two ago. Yet most people will use a tablet to prop up a writing pad. Like very few people are using tablets as a part of their workflow on a day-to-day basis. Or you watch a salesperson. We have an investment in a company called Yesware, which is, takes a look at what salespeople do. And if you look at what a salesperson does, most of their day is spent making phone calls and sending email. And then the last hour of their day is spent telling Salesforce